welcome into another episode of the Coyotes Corner podcast alongside Dave Vest, who already looks confused. I'm Luke Lapinski. Dave, why are you so confused over there?
That initial sound you made, it was a little confusing. It's kind of like a yike.
Yeah, that's supposed to fire you up.
Got it.
And it gets the audience sort of involved. I feel like it makes it seem like they're right here with us.
I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
Doesn't sound like it now. You're already questioning me. We're 23 seconds in. All right, we got a lot of hockey news to talk about here.
We do. We're both sitting here in my office.
It's true.
I've got the whiteboard fired up, and it's full. Look at that. It's crammed full of tidbits.
And knowledge and you love
information.
the whiteboard.
What's that?
You love that whiteboard.
I do. I like it. I'm a list maker. I love
Apparently.
to make lists at the start of the day and cross things off. Although, truth be told,
please be honest with me on this show.
I usually lose the list.
Okay.
So the first thing on the next day's list is
Find
find the
old
list.
So you just have a list now that's like 10 fine lists, basically?
Yes.
All right, well, you have a list up here on the board of things you would like to talk about today. They're all completely illegible, so let's start with the World Championships, because that was a thing that happened, and I'm assuming that's somewhere on that board of whatever that is. That's English on that board, right?
Well said. That was a thing that happened. The IIHF World Championship held in Russia, and we bring it up, of course, because several of the Coyotes were involved. Let's start with Max Domi. He played for Team Canada, and they won the gold medal for the second year in a row. Back-to-back gold medals for Team Canada. Congratulations to Max Domi.
Yeah, it was a loaded roster. I think you and I talked about this last time. It's, different players are going to get different things out of that tournament. But for the Coyotes, having guys like Max Domi and Connor Murphy over there that are young players that are still this is going to be Domi's second year in the NHL. He's obviously a very skilled player, but you go over there and you're playing with an all-star team of some of the best players from your country. I think he gets more out of that than Corey Perry, just to pick a name, that was on that team. And so I think it could be really beneficial to the Coyotes down the line. But also, if you saw Max on social media or whatever, he made the most of the experience. And it seemed like a very tight-knit team for a bunch of guys that play on different NHL teams.
Yeah, that's a great point. Max didn't play a lot of minutes. I think he played maybe 5 or 6 minutes a game. He did score a goal. He had one goal in the 10 games that they played. But the experience itself, being part of that team, and as you said, it looked like Max had a great time and a lot of fun. So, obviously they go over there to win the gold medal, but I think a big part of it for someone young like Max is to take in the experience, play with elite players from Canada, and just have success on an international stage, and they certainly did that.
Yeah, and it almost felt like it was a bigger deal this year, the World Championships, for whatever reason. They're held every year, but it just felt like, and maybe it's because the World Cup's coming up, and so everybody sort of has that international feel, and it's always kind of a big deal because the regular season for hockey has ended, so there's already 14, and then another 8 teams join them, NHL teams that are out of it at that point, so you want more hockey, but it did feel like it was a big deal this year. Maybe it was just because Max was there and he was winning.
You mentioned Connor Murphy. He had a very nice tournament playing for Team USA. He was an alternate captain, played in every game. I believe he scored 4 goals, 3 or 4 goals.
Yeah, obviously as a defenseman, one of them was a real nice play between him and Austin Matthews. It was, again, this goes back to you want your young players over there because they're learning to play with and against the best, especially when they're in a leadership role like that.
And the U.S. made it to the bronze medal game. They didn't win, so they finished 4th, but still a great experience for Connor Murphy. Tobias Rieder, he also participated for Germany. His experience not so great.
Not as great as the other guys.
And we say that because he was injured.
Yeah. But, timeline, he should be fine well before next. He's going to be playing the World Cup, actually, which is before next season even starts. So in terms of being worried from a Coyotes perspective, you don't have to be. It's always tough to see anybody hurt, but he'll be fine before next season.
You mentioned Corey Perry. That's how Rieder was injured. He and Corey Perry collided knee to knee. Rieder got the worst of it, but it's nothing serious that's going to interrupt his participation for next season. And as you mentioned, he'll be at the World Cup of Hockey. He's one of 4 Coyotes who will be participating. As we learned last week, we already knew that Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Martin Hansel were going to play for their countries. But then last week, 2 more Coyotes added to the roster.
Yeah, Zbynek McCulloch gets to go, which I think is great for where he is in his career, because the World Cup I see a little bit differently than the World Championships. The World Cup is something that the NHL is going to prop up and make very big here in the future. And, depending whatever happens with or without the Olympics, I think the World Cup's going to be sort of the premier stage internationally for hockey. I've felt this way for a couple of years now, and I mean, you see the way they're marketing it already. They've been marketing it since, March? And it's, aggressively, which I like to see on TV. The commercials are hilarious, but the World Cup itself doesn't start till September. But the way it's set up, you're going to have that essentially for some of these guys, it'll almost be like their training camp. So you're getting hockey before the hockey season next year, which I like the Olympics, but I like not having a break in the NHL season. And so this is going to be an interesting experience. And as you mentioned, the Coyotes have 4 people there.
Okay, so let's move on, Luke. Fast and furious here today.
Seriously, you got somewhere to be?
I do, actually.
We should point out, you made me listen to our previous episode before this. And
I did.
We'll explain why later in the show, I'm sure.
Well, rightfully so, as we'll point out.
Although, yeah, maybe.
Next topic is the draft and the draft combine, which is going on as we speak. Today, I believe, is the big day at the draft combine where 114 draft hopefuls are there on the bikes and jumping and climbing through tires, perhaps, all those things that go on.
All those things we do before the podcast.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Physical testing is what I'm getting at. They're doing that today up in Buffalo. The Coyotes, of course, are represented there. General Manager John Chaika and his staff. I'm guessing that they've interviewed 50-plus players for the upcoming draft, which is now only, as I look at my calendar,
only just over 3 weeks away.
3 weeks away. The news of the week, as far as that goes, is that the Coyotes had 7 draft picks. Now they have 8.
Yeah, so they don't elect to sign Connor Bleakley, who they got in the trade with Colorado for Mikkel Bodker. So they got Kyle Wood out of that trade, and they're going to get a second-round pick, which is going to be pick 53 in this upcoming draft. And so now, what do they have? They have pick 7, pick 20, pick 37, and pick 53. That's pretty nice to have those options in the top 53 picks. You have 4 picks, and what is a lot of people are saying is going to be a pretty good draft. And it just kind of goes back to, if you think back to the trade deadline, and there were teams looking to move players. I remember this distinctly for maybe a second-round pick. That market just wasn't there. The Coyotes were able to get Kyle Wood and a second-round pick now, as it turns out. And especially at this year's trade deadline, that's not a bad grab at all.
So Austin Matthews is the presumptive number 1 pick. However, having said that...
Are we going to go through all 53 that we think will be available?
Well, if time allows. Okay. But I bring it up only because, of course, Austin Matthews is from Scottsdale, and whether he goes first or second, it's great for hockey in Arizona. But I bring it up because for the first time I'm hearing that Patrick Laine of Finland may be challenging Austin Matthews to be the number 1 pick. You look like you're about to laugh right in my face.
Yeah, well, and the only reason I'm not laughing right in your face is because I've heard this already, and I've laughed in everybody else's face. There's just no way. I mean, there's nothing against Patrick Laine. He might be, I think he will be an excellent player, and Winnipeg is very fortunate to end up with that pick. I'm assuming they're going to take him at number 2, but Toronto, after all this, is not going to pass on Austin Matthews, who's a big center at number 1. I mean, that's exactly what Toronto needs. And you know what? I will say this, kind of going off a little bit off of your crazy whiteboard up there. Obviously, you'd love to have Austin Matthews here. That storyline is fantastic. But the more I think about it, if he's not going to be here, having him in that giant hockey market and just constantly being a reminder of of how well hockey can work in the desert. Yeah, I understand every time a Maple Leafs fan goes to a game and as that team starts to have success, they're not going to be like, that's Austin Matthews from Scottsdale. But that is a part of who he is. And so if he really becomes the player that a lot of people think he can become, and he starts to resurrect that franchise, which I don't have to describe the popularity of the Toronto Maple Leafs to you, that's going to be kind of cool just for the hockey in the desert. Not necessarily the Coyotes, obviously, but just hockey here.
Well, it's not on the whiteboard, so I'll limit my response.
Obviously.
But that's an excellent point.
Thank you.
Agree with you 100%. Anything I would add to that would be nonsensical.
As usual, yeah.
Next topic.
Well, wait, we're not done with the draft yet.
Okay.
Are we? I'm excited for the draft this year. Last year the Coyotes picked 3rd. They picked 3rd. They got Dylan Strome and Nick Merkley. But now to have that pick at 7 this year, I don't know how much you've looked at scouting reports specifically, but you mentioned Patrick Laine and Jesse Puljujarvi are supposed to be like 2 and 3, and Austin Matthews is supposed to be 1. And then from like 4 to 11, 12, there's a lot of players that are kind of even. It just sort of depends what your team needs. I think the Coyotes are going to get a really good player at pick 7 if they stay there. I mean, they could also move up or down. They've got so many options now.
Right, and I anticipate the two of us doing another podcast before the draft. Hopefully, I know you're a busy man, but
just ask me on the air like that. Now I've pressured to say yes.
Just to touch on it a little bit.
All right,
here.
I'll be back tomorrow.
I don't know if you watched the Memorial Cup, and we're going to talk about this more later in the podcast, but a couple players from there jumped out at me. Most notably, Matthew Tkachuk, the son of former Coyotes captain Keith Tkachuk.
And Ole Ulevi. London, loaded. I mean, I'll just take all of London. We already have half of London.
Did you notice I said Matthew Tkachuk?
Yes.
Leaving you to pronounce
the Finnish name?
Yes.
Yeah, that's okay. I prepared for this. I knew you were going to. And actually, Max Jones is on that team, too, who he's not going to be a top 10 pick. But both the guys we just talked about are top 10 picks, and Max Jones is probably a first-round pick. And that team had Mitch Marner and Christian Dvorak. I mean, no, I guess we can just transition right now to the Memorial Cup because they were so dominant.
Let's.
Okay.
Christian Dvorak, he just yesterday, by the way, was voted by the OHL general managers as the number 1 center in the league for the season. He was the first team all-star team center. So congratulations to Christian Dvorak. He just had a amazing run in the playoffs, OHL playoffs, and then the 4 games in the Memorial Cup, 7 goals. And you could argue he had 8. I know I saw that puck.
Yeah, that was kind of, and that would have tied the all-time record.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a big deal as to who they give that goal to ultimately.
I'm referring to the game-winning goal, which was credited to Matthew Tkachuk, who had a great shot. But it looked like it hit off Christian Dvorak, and in talking to him, he said he felt it. Doesn't matter. They won. They're happy. But anyway, Christian Dvorak, just amazing.
They haven't lost
run.
in like 2 months either, by the way. But go
17
ahead.
wins in a row.
17 playoff / Memorial Cup wins in a row.
Right.
I mean, just cruising.
I think they said the last time they had even trailed in a game before the Memorial Cup Final, it was spring training for baseball. It's June the 1st
ridiculous.
Or whatever it was, May 29th.
It's insane.
So, Christian Dvorak, speak.
Wow. Do you want me to speak in Christian Dvorak's voice? Like, is this an impression thing, or
if you can?
I can't. But I will say this about Christian Dvorak: the Coyotes have had a lot of good picks in recent years, and Dylan Strome obviously jumps out because everybody expects the world of him, and Max Domi was a high pick, and not like Christian Dvorak was a low pick. But when you pick a player that already has high expectations, and then they really take off and improve since, like after you pick them. I mean, Christian Dvorak, I'd have to look in terms of the year he was drafted. There's not a whole lot of players that have improved more than him. And he was already obviously thought of highly enough to be picked where he was, but it is impressive to me how much better he's gotten, just even in the 2 years since the Coyotes drafted him. That line we talked about last podcast, and they weren't even in the Memorial Cup yet, but that line of Tkachuk, Marner, and Dvorak was unreal. I mean, think last year, Erie had Connor McDavid and Dylan Strome. They didn't even win the OHL title. And London just essentially swept right through the OHL with the exception of those 2 losses in the first round. But, I mean, it's the best of 7 series for a reason. And then they sweep right through the Memorial Cup, and a lot of it was because of that line.
I spoke to Christian Dvorak on the phone yesterday, and what I took away from the conversation was he is very proud of what he and his London teammates accomplished, but he's quickly turned the page. He's ready
I like it.
To come in to training camp and compete for a job for the Coyotes next season. And in talking to people in this building, Steve Sullivan comes to mind, and he's already proclaimed that Christian Dvorak is ready to play pro hockey. Now, he said pro hockey, not necessarily NHL, but he's ready to go. It's just a matter of time. And he also said the sky's the limit for Christian Dvorak.
Yeah, I saw that quote, and obviously Steve Sullivan knows a thing or two about player development, and so that's got to feel good if you're Christian Dvorak to hear somebody like Sully say that. It's again, people look at the Coyotes prospect system, and I'm just going back like a year. They would look and they'd say, this Max Domi guy's going to be good. Anthony Duclair is going to be good. Dylan Strome was a great pick. And you start to rattle these players off. Christian Dvorak was kind of further down the list, at least nationally. I mean, he was here at the draft party last year with the jersey unveiling, so the team knew what they had. But he's just gotten so much better each year. And so, yeah, if you had asked just even a typical Coyotes fan a year or two ago, like, is Christian Dvorak going to make the team in 2016? they probably have been like, he's a project down the line. He might make it next year. Like the fact that he continues to get better and he has that attitude you just described, that's got to be music to Coyotes fans' ears.
And you know what, Luke? Even if he doesn't make it with the Coyotes, you know where he's going to be playing next year?
Right down the street.
Right down the street is correct. And the street being I-10, about 115 miles from where we're sitting now, the Tucson Convention Center. How'd you like that transition?
That was seamless.
Professional.
It moved. Yeah, it was amazing.
Semi-professional.
I was going to make a driving joke, but I won't. No, that's a great. I think you and I have talked about this on the show, but I'll just repeat it a little bit. How it makes so much sense on so many levels for so many different people to have the AHL team in Tucson. And the last time we talked about this, I don't think it was actually official. Now it's official. The team will be there. It's going to be a fun team to watch because you're right. The Coyotes have a lot of good prospects. They can't all make the team next year. So somebody like Dvorak may be down there, or whoever may start the year there and get called up. And, oh, by the way, if you call him up, it's a 2-hour drive instead of an 8-hour flight or whatever it was. It's a great situation. And if I lived in Tucson, I'd just be excited to have a professional hockey team. I would totally embrace that. But the fact that they're going to have some of the top prospects in the game right out of the gate is – that's going to be fun. I'm going to drive down there for some games just on Coyotes off days.
So the big news this week about the AHL team is that the team will unveil its new name and logo on June the 18th. It's a Saturday afternoon at the Tucson Convention Center. Now, the Coyotes held a Name the Team contest for the fans. That has come and gone. The result is official. It's still a secret. But fans will learn what that team name is going to be on the 18th. I'll be down there for that. Jody Jackson is going to be hosting the event. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I believe that the fans in Tucson, they're going to like the name, being privy to that information.
Oh, look at you.
Am I impressing you?
I'm always impressed by you when we do this show. It goes back to how we kind of opened this show. It's been the off season now for a month and a half.
It doesn't feel like it.
Right. And I remember, as I said, the first show of the off season, I can whittle the off season down to about 8 days, and you laughed at me. But here we go. Like, we've still got the Stanley Cup going on, so that's going to be that's plenty of hockey going on. Then you've got the team in Tucson doing the whole unveiling on the 18th. Then you've got the NHL Awards show on the 22nd. You've got the draft on the 24th and 25th. So we're going to get into July before it really feels like the off season. And then at some point in July, there's prospect camp. So we're getting closer to training camp here in September.
Okay, you mentioned the NHL playoffs, and you also mentioned that we spent about 10 minutes in my office here going back and listening to previous podcasts. Yeah, why don't you tell the listeners why we did that? Because if I do it, it's just going to come off real cheesy.
Which is why you should do it, because it was very cheesy. So we sit down, and the last time we did this show, we were down to Pittsburgh and Tampa in the East, and we were down to 4 teams in the West. There was 2 Game 7s coming up. And so we both had St. Louis, San Jose moving on into the Western Conference Finals, which is ultimately what happened. And I don't know why I picked St. Louis, because I've been high on San Jose the whole time, but whatever. I went with St. Louis. And I told Dave, you picked San Jose. And he's like, well, no, let's listen to 10 minutes of the previous podcast just so he could hear what I already told him was going to happen. And then the look on your face, you looked like a child that just won the lottery. Can children even play the lottery?
I don't think they can, but maybe that's why the look would be so cool.
Yeah, that was a very cool look. Good point. So, yes, I guess this is a roundabout way of saying Dave predicted that San Jose would beat St. Louis.
And then I also predicted, not to rub it in or anything, that I didn't think anyone was going to touch the Pittsburgh
Penguins. I picked Pittsburgh, too.
But not quite as emphatically as I did.
Well,
Let's just leave it at that. Pittsburgh is leading the Sharks 2-0.
And the series isn't over either, by the way.
Of course. I mean, what do they say? A series doesn't start till the home team loses a game.
Good luck explaining that to San Jose if the home team wins every game in the series and Pittsburgh's running around with the cup and San Jose's like, wait, the series hasn't started yet.
It's not fair.
No.
So, of course, it's not over. I actually think San Jose will win Game 3. And maybe even Game 4. But I do think ultimately Pittsburgh is going to win this. I have to go back to what I saw when Pittsburgh was playing the New York Rangers in the first round of the playoffs, and just how dominant they were, and just how impressed I was then. And nothing has let up. I mean, they have what's the expression the ASU football coach likes to say? Left lane, hammer down.
Hammer down, yeah.
It just seems like they're on a roll, and nothing's going to stop them. And the Sharks in the first 2 games, that didn't look like the Sharks to me. They look confused and frustrated. They've scored 3 goals in 2 games. That's not them. And having said that, and having what I said earlier, I do think they'll win Game 3 and make a series out of it, but ultimately I'm sticking with Pittsburgh to go all the way.
Yeah, I think we're going to see San Jose's best game of the playoffs in Game 3. I mean,
we better.
Yeah, on top of the fact that they have to win that game, it's the first ever Stanley Cup game being played in San Jose. So and Pittsburgh, and you kind of alluded to this, I honestly feel like dominated the first 2 games, but they were both 1-goal games. And the last one went to overtime. I mean, we're not that far from the series being 1-1 or I guess even 2-0. But the one thing you said, and I'm going to paraphrase it because it was almost a minute ago and I already forgot, but basically Pittsburgh just doesn't let up. And in years past, and I'm somebody that watches Pittsburgh closely, I'm from Pittsburgh, so that's kind of like the Eastern Conference team I follow closely. Years past in the playoffs, it felt like they had to win 4 games in the series, but once they lost 1, they were done. They would just fall apart. Whereas this year, when they lose a game, I'm with you. I think San Jose is going to come out and win Game 3, and I think Pittsburgh's going to play their best game in Game 4 because they respond to those losses so much better now. So it's that sort of relentlessness that I'm assuming Mike Sullivan has. He's played most of the role in that, but he can't be 100%. I think Mike Sullivan was able to unlock whatever frustration the Penguins have had over the last 6-7 years of failing to meet their own expectations, whether those were too high or not. And this is just basic, and I think this bodes well not only for the NHL down the line, for a team like the Coyotes in the future as well. Pittsburgh is built on speed, and that's where, especially if it's where this league's going anyway. But if Pittsburgh wins the Cup, just being faster than everybody, I mean, the Coyotes are building their way towards speed. Not every team's doing that. You mentioned San Jose looked confused in Game 1. The first period, they looked overwhelmed just by the speed. And you see Pittsburgh twice a year, and they haven't seen them coached by Mike Sullivan. So the first 2 times they saw them, they were coached in a much different way. They weren't using their speed. They looked confused, which is amazing because San Jose is a really good team.
Now, I know you're loyal to the Coyotes, as am I. We work for the team. That's our team. But
we're in the arena right now.
You've said that you're from Pittsburgh. So I want to ask you, I'm sure you were a Penguins fan your whole life before coming here and probably still even a little today. Are you surprised that the fact that the names of these players who are playing such key roles for the Penguins are guys like Matt Murray and Rust and Sheary? I mean, these aren't the guys that are on the cover of the media guide.
That's the thing. Since you made us listen to our last podcast before the show, we said in there, it's not Crosby and Malkin that are scoring the goals and they're still winning. Murray, he probably should surprise me more, but he had 12 shutouts last year in the AHL, and so I'm not as surprised by him. And I believe John Elkin worked with him, and he's had some pretty good things to say about John Elkin.
I saw a tweet from John Elkin that makes me think you're correct.
Yes, I'm pretty sure I'm right. But you're right. I mean, Brian Rust coming in, scoring both the goals in Game 7 against Tampa, scoring the first goal of the Stanley Cup. He's had 4 goals in the regular season, got 6 in the playoffs. This is what Pittsburgh's been missing in the past, and I think the bigger picture is looking at what you need to win the Stanley Cup in today's NHL. You need speed. It helps to have a guy like Sidney Crosby because even when he's not scoring, he's drawing up plays at the faceoff. But you need to have depth, and Pittsburgh in years past did not have depth. If you look at their roster, their game that ended their 2015 season, 8 of those guys were left when Game 1 of the Stanley Cup this year started. So you look at their roster last year, like that guy was on the team. They're just deep this year, and a lot of it's the rookies. A lot of that's Mike Sullivan. He was coaching them at the start of the year, but you got to have depth and you have to have speed in today's NHL.
Final prediction from me: the home team will win the first 5 games in this Stanley Cup Final. Pittsburgh will win Game 6 and win the Cup in San Jose.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think San Jose is going to bounce back with a huge effort in Game 3. I think Pittsburgh will respond to that in Game 4, and maybe San Jose still wins Game 4, but San Jose's got to beat Pittsburgh 4 out of 5 times, and Pittsburgh just finally lost twice in a row last round. That was like the first time under Mike Sullivan other than his first couple games. You're right. When we saw Pittsburgh on that road trip when the Coyotes played them, they were the best team of a ridiculously loaded road trip, and they're playing better now. So I'm with you, Dave. Just so next time we do the show, when you play back the entire podcast of this one, I'm at least on your side.
All right, so let's wrap this up with a plug.
Okay.
It's your event, or you're part of this event.
I was going to say, I didn't know it was my event.
It's Luke Lapinski Presents
the Draft Party.
Yes.
Just not what it's called. No, the Draft Party will be here at Gila River Arena on June 24th. 3 to 7, I believe, is the exact time.
That's correct.
Burns and Gambo will be here from Arizona Sports 98.7. Myself and Bob Heathouse will be on with them. We'll be around the arena. There's going to be other people here, too. I mean, obviously, from the team presenting stuff. There's actually a few things going on this year. Last year, it was big because we had the jersey unveiling. But there's other stuff going on this year.
It's the 20-year patch reveal.
Yes, which is exciting.
Yes.
20 years already. It doesn't even feel like it's been 20 years, does it?
Well, and you have to factor in the lockout. So, if you're doing the math at home and you're like,
18
wait
and a half
minute,
years.
It's 21.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
actually seasons played,
Okay.
I think is what's being celebrated.
Yes. Okay. And that'll be cool.
It will. It'll be very cool. And what's even cooler is that the Coyotes have 2 first-round draft picks. So instead of just 1 for most teams. So you'll be able to see who the Coyotes pick with the 7th overall pick. And then I'm guessing about an hour later, hour and 15 minutes maybe, the number 20 pick. And that's, of course, if everything stays as is, as this sheet lies on my desk here.
Yeah, I mean, it is legitimately turning into a party because you're between 3 and 7. I would assume by 7 o'clock, the 20th pick will probably be made. Last year they picked 30th, which is still a first-round pick, and everybody's excited about Nick Merkley, but that was sort of after the in-arena draft party had ended. So this year, you figure they're going to make those 2 picks while everybody's here, or, like you said, I mean, you could trade one of those down and get a player you might just trade one for a player that's going to help your team next year. You could package them and move up if that's a thing that you want to do. I mean, there's a lot of options, and you look up and down this list. I mean, there are teams that don't even have any first-round picks. And
right.
So to have 2 and just to continuously have 2 in the first and second round every single year, it feels like right now, that's how you build your team for the long haul, which is obviously the vision they laid out here a couple years ago.
All right, Luke. It looks like we've completed the whiteboard, unless, of course, you want to do some of those personal things that I have listed there.
Yeah, we'll save that for a different podcast.
Okay.
I don't know that the world wants to hear about your grocery list, do they?
And getting a car wash.
You still do that? That feels so old school. Just let the rain wash your car. It rains here twice a year. All right, so this was fun. Dave, I'll talk to you. We'll do this again before the draft party. You're going to the draft.
I am. Leaving on the 23rd of June, so within the next 3 weeks here, we'll have to do this again and really focus in on the draft. We'll have a chance to talk to John Chaika before everybody with the Coyotes heads to Buffalo. So we'll bring that to our listeners here, what John has to say, and by then, we'll have more names to talk about. We'll do a little more digging into who might be available and who might be attractive at the 7th pick.
And now you're going to be riding a unicycle all the way to Buffalo, correct?
That is correct.
Will you be juggling anything, or is it just like a comical unicycle?
I really don't want to...
you don't want to give too much away.
I don't want to give too much away.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Okay.
It'll be quite an event.
All right, so look forward to that in the days leading up to the draft. For Dave Vest, I'm Luke Lapinski. Thanks for listening to this episode of Coyotes Corner.